In a world where everyone feels the need to talk, explain, announce, and overshare every passing thought, one of the most powerful tools we have has almost completely disappeared: strategic silence. Today, people treat communication like a reflex, not a choice. They tweet impulsively, comment instantly, and explain themselves before anyone even asks. But here's the truth: Machiavelli understood centuries before smartphones existed. The person who knows when to shut up will always outperform the person who can't stop talking. Because while most people are busy making noise, the real operator, the real strategist, uses silence as a weapon. Not as absence, not as weakness, but as intentional power. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine thinker whose name has become synonymous with strategy, influence, and political realism, understood the value of what you don't say. His most famous work, The Prince, is full of direct advice, yet some of his sharpest insights are actually about what should remain unspoken. The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances. He wrote a sentence that hits even harder today. Because communication is how we create appearances. But silence? Silence preserves reality. Silence hides the hand that everyone else is desperately trying to read. And in the age of constant exposure, those who master this discipline don't just protect themselves. They win while everyone else is still talking about winning. Let's break down why. First, understand that unnecessary speech always comes with a cost. Machiavelli lived in an era when the wrong words could get you exiled or killed. Today the stakes are lower, but the effect is the same. The more you say, the more you risk. Words create commitments. They bind you. They limit your future options. If you announce your plans before they're ready, suddenly you're accountable to other people's expectation. If you change your mind later, you'll look inconsistent. But if you stay silent, if you keep your intentions close, you can adapt freely, without explanation, without apology. Second, the more you talk, the more you expose your way of thinking. Every explanation, every justification, every argument reveals how your mind works, your fears, your impulses, your blind spots. And the moment people understand your thought process, they can predict you, influence you, even manipulate you. Machiavelli warned that the intelligence of a ruler could be judged by the people he surrounded himself with, and the same principle applies today. Listen to how someone explains themselves, and you immediately see their strategic limits. And then there's the third, deeper cost. The more you speak, the more you kill your mystique. You become ordinary. Because mystery creates power. Distance creates respect. When someone explains everything, when they justify every move, narrate every decision, and share every emotion, they remove the aura that makes people take them seriously. The extraordinary becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes forgettable. Just look at everyday situations. Think about the colleague who chimes in every single meeting, even when they have nothing meaningful to add. Their voice loses impact. Or the friend who lives on social media, sharing every detail of their life. People stop paying attention. Or the negotiator who's so afraid of silence that they fill every pause with concessions. They lose leverage before the conversation even gets serious. Even leaders fall into this trap. A leader who responds to every criticism shrinks themselves. They elevate the critic and lower their own stature. Machiavelli would see our obsession with constant communication, our need to explain, react, post, and clarify not as authenticity, but as strategic self-sabotage, a voluntary surrender of power. So, what's the alternative? It's not just talk less. Machiavelli wasn't promoting awkward silence, he was promoting strategic silence. And he broke it into 3 different forms, each with its own purpose. The first is information-gathering silence. This is where the wise man listens while the fool rushes to speak. Machiavelli wrote, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. The fool dumps their intentions immediately. The wise person stays quiet long enough to understand everyone else first." Why does this work? Because silence creates an asymmetric information advantage. When you hold back, people fill the space. They reveal their motives, fears, and weaknesses. In negotiations, this is why the rule exists. Whoever speaks first loses. In relationships, the person who talks less but listens more ends up understanding the dynamic far better. In competition, broadcasting your strategy signals insecurity. Meanwhile, the quiet competitor simply executes. The second form is authority-building silence. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must imitate both the fox and the Leo, one cunning, one strong. And part of the fox's cunning is knowing when speech reduces authority instead of strengthening it. When a leader speaks only when it matters, their words hit harder. When they ignore unimportant criticism, they look confident rather than defensive. Authority isn't just built by decisive action, it's built by selective communication. You see this everywhere. The nervous junior employee over-explains. The CEO gives a short, precise answer. The insecure person rationalizes everything. The secure person states something once and moves on. The anxious leader reacts to every provocation. The powerful one responds only when strategically useful. The difference? Silence. The third form is ambiguity-preserving silence. This is the silence that keeps your options open. Machiavelli famously said it's safer to be feared than loved when you can't be both. But the deeper lesson wasn't about fear. It was about the power of multiple interpretations. When you leave things open-ended, people project. They fill in the blanks with what they want to believe. Politicians use this. Negotiators use this. Leaders use this. If you leave some space between your intentions and your explanation, you maintain room to maneuver. You maintain deniability. You retain freedom of action. And importantly, ambiguity isn't deception. It's discipline. It's acknowledging that premature clarity often harms you more than silence ever could. All three forms, information gathering, authority building, and ambiguity preserving silence, make you more effective not because you say less, but because you speak only when it counts. And this brings us to something deeper, the psychological power of silence itself. Silence creates projection spaces. When you stay quiet at key moments, people reveal themselves without you having to do anything. Their assumptions, their fears, their insecurities spill out. And because it feels voluntary, it's far more honest than anything you could extract by questioning them. Skilled interrogators know this. Skilled negotiators know this. Anyone who has ever held strong eye contact during an argument knows this. Silence also establishes dominance in communication. The person who talks the most seems to be reaching, grasping, persuading, trying. But the person who speaks slowly, selectively, that person becomes the judge, not the pleader. Silence elevates you without you having to elevate yourself. And finally, silence creates mystique. It enhances the aura around you. People can see you, but they can't feel you. They can't access your interior world. And as Machiavelli said, people judge more by what they see than by what they understand. When you don't reveal everything, you appear more capable, more intelligent, more powerful than you may actually be. That's the hidden advantage. Modern culture loves to preach transparency, openness, authenticity, as if saying everything that crosses your mind is somehow a path to purity or liberation. Share your truth. Speak your mind. Don't hold anything back. It sounds noble, but Machiavelli would have called it what it really is, a trap. He knew that words are commitments, and commitments chain you to past declarations that may no longer serve you. The promise given was a necessity of the past, he wrote. The word broken is a necessity of the present. In today's world, transparency demands that you stick to what you once said. Even when circumstances change, even when new information emerges, even when flexibility would serve you far better. Machiavelli wasn't advocating dishonesty. He wasn't saying, lie. He was saying, tell the truth that's useful and leave the truth that isn't unsaid. Speak when it serves your objectives, not when it simply serves your emotions. Transparency becomes dangerous when it becomes compulsive. When you overshare works in progress. When you reveal half-formed opinions. When you talk through your insecurities publicly. When you narrate your every move before you've even made it. In negotiations, this can cost you leverage. At work, it can expose your weaknesses. In relationships, it can create problems that didn't exist in the first place. Machiavelli would see these not as acts of authenticity, but as strategic mistakes. Moments where you voluntarily surrender power. The transparent person becomes predictable, and predictability in strategy is death. Predictability invites manipulation. Predictability invites pressure. Predictability makes you ordinary. And that's the heart of Machiavelli's philosophy. The ordinary are controlled by the extraordinary. If you want influence, if you want respect, if you want people to take your presence seriously, you cannot communicate like the masses. You cannot explain everything. You cannot reveal everything. You cannot narrate your entire inner world just because you're uncomfortable holding it inside. The Machiavellian communicator speaks to achieve outcomes, not to express themselves. And silence is a part of that discipline. So, how do you actually apply this? What does strategic silence look like in the modern world? Let's break it down into the practical discipline Machiavelli was pointing toward. First, practice information asymmetry. Before you give your stance on anything that matters, whether it's a project, a negotiation, a conflict, or even a personal conversation, make sure you understand the other side first. Ask questions. Pay attention to what people say spontaneously versus what they say when pushed. Listen for the things they leave out. Machiavelli warned that traps and wolves both exist in politics and life. The fox detects the traps, and detection begins with silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a conversation is simply not rush to fill the air. Most people feel uncomfortable with silence. They'll fill it. And when they do, they reveal themselves, their motives, their commitments, their fears. This alone gives you leverage without you having to do anything. Second, cultivate strategic ambiguity. Not confusion, not dishonesty. Simply, flexibility. The less you commit to specifics prematurely, the more room you have to adapt your actions later without contradiction. In leadership, this might look like stating the destination clearly while keeping the exact path open. In relationships, it could mean expressing your values without mapping out every future detail. In competition, it means keeping your strategy private while your opponents reveal theirs. Machiavelli's point was simple. Clarity too early is often weakness. Ambiguity preserves your options. Third, build comfort with silence. This might be the hardest skill, because silence feels like vulnerability. But the truth is, silence is often a position of strength. The person who can sit calmly in moments where others panic, ramble, defend themselves, or over-explain always holds the advantage. In negotiations, silence after you make your statement forces the other person to react first. In arguments, silence communicates restraint and confidence instead of emotional chaos. In leadership, silence after delivering a decision shows that you trust the decision, and people feel that. Learning to hold the silence, not break it, is a form of psychological dominance. But Machiavelli never said we should be quiet forever. He described something I call the strategic whisper, the idea that silence makes your words more powerful, not less. When you finally do speak, the contrast between your silence and your communication amplifies the message. Think about someone in your life who hardly ever talks, but when they finally say something, everyone listens. That's strategic silence. That's power. And now, here's the irony Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone in history. The people who master silence are rarely noticed. We notice the loud people, the expressive people, the dramatic people, the constant talkers. But the ones who quietly maneuver, who gather information without giving any, who predict others without revealing themselves, those are the people who rise. Those are the people who win. Those are the people who shape outcomes without ever announcing their intentions. These individuals aren't mysterious because they try to be. They're mysterious because they don't rush to make themselves known. They're not intimidating because they seek intimidation. They're intimidating because they understand a simple psychological truth. People fear what they can't read, and silence makes you unreadable. Now, let's go deeper, because the psychological effects of silence are more powerful than most people realize. First, silence creates a projection field. When you say nothing, people don't know your position, so they guess. And their guesses almost always reveal more about them than about you. Their insecurities, hopes, biases, fears, everything comes to the surface. This is how interrogators extract information without asking aggressive questions. This is how negotiators win without raising their voice. The discomfort of silence pushes others to speak more than they planned. Second, silence shifts the social hierarchy. The person who talks most is seeking approval from the group. The person who talks least appears self-contained, self-assured, independent of validation. And in any social environment, workplaces, friendships, families, negotiations, the silent person is assumed to be the one with more power, even if that's not objectively true. Authority is partly about perception, and silence is one of the strongest signals of internal authority. Third, silence creates mystique, and mystique amplifies power. The moment someone can't fully understand you, they begin to overestimate you. They wonder what you're thinking. They assume your intentions are deeper than they are. They project competence, intelligence, strategy, patience, all because they lack information. This isn't deception. It's restraint. And it gives you an edge in situations where being ordinary or predictable would work against you. At this point, the question becomes, how do you combine all of this into something usable, something practical, something you can apply today? That's where we go next. So, how do we convert Machiavelli's ideas into clear, modern, real-world tactics? The answer is surprisingly simple. You build the discipline of silence. You train yourself to speak consciously, strategically, and intentionally, not reflexively or emotionally. Because Machiavelli never said, "Be silent." What he truly meant was, use silence the way others use words. Let's break this discipline down, starting with the most fundamental principle. 1. Practice information asymmetry. Always know more than you reveal. Before you speak on anything important, before you share your perspective, before you commit to a side, you must understand the landscape. Most people do the opposite. They rush to take a position. They state their opinion instantly. They reveal everything before gathering anything. Machiavelli believed this was a fatal flaw. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves, he wrote. Meaning, strength without awareness is useless. Awareness without silence is impossible. Fox-like cunning begins with strategic observation. You listen for patterns, you observe reactions, you notice what people emphasize, what they avoid, what they lie about, what they overshare. And you share only what is necessary, only when it benefits you, and only after you've taken full stock of the room. In negotiations, this is everything. Before you state your price, you learn theirs. Before you express your needs, you uncover their motives. Before you push, you watch where they naturally lean. You create leverage through silence, not speech. At work, information asymmetry can change your entire trajectory. When everyone else blurts out their frustrations, exposes their insecurities, states their limitations, you quietly gather intelligence. You learn how decisions are made. You learn who influences who. You learn what people actually want beneath the surface layer of professionalism. People think power comes from shouting. Machiavelli knew it comes from understanding. 2. Cultivate strategic ambiguity. Protect your freedom of action. Most people trap themselves with their own words. They commit to specific plans too early. They promise outcomes they can't control. They explain details that weren't even requested. They speak with precision when silence would give them flexibility. Strategic ambiguity is the middle path between silence and speech. You speak, but not rigidly. You respond, but not definitively. You express intent without locking yourself into one single path. A leader might say, "We're exploring several strong directions," instead of, "We're definitely doing X." A negotiator might say, "I'm open to discussing possibilities," instead of, "I need this exact number." A partner might say, "I'm committed to us," without spelling out every long-term detail that neither party can predict. Ambiguity isn't deception, it's wisdom. It preserves your room to maneuver. Machiavelli understood that life is fluid. Alliances shift. Opportunities evolve. Circumstances change. The person who binds themselves too tightly to any one path loses the ability to pivot when they need to. Strategic ambiguity keeps every option alive. 3. Build comfort with silence. Let others expose themselves. This is the hardest and most transformative part of Machiavelli's discipline. Silence is uncomfortable. Silence is unnatural. Silence forces you to sit with tension, uncertainty, and vulnerability. But this discomfort is where power resides. Most people cannot handle silence. They break it instantly. They fill it with extra explanations, defensive comments, nervous rambling, or unnecessary details. But if you can stay still, if you can hold the space, people will reveal everything you need to know. In negotiations, silence after you make an offer forces the other person to justify, explain, and counter against their own best interests. In conflicts, silence after hearing an accusation forces the other person to keep talking and often overextend themselves. In leadership, silence after delivering a decision communicates confidence. It shows you're not seeking approval. It shows the decision stands on its own. Silence also creates the most powerful psychological effect of all. When you speak less, every word carries more weight. 4. Use speech sparingly. The strategic whisper. Machiavelli didn't want you to be mute. He wanted you to be intentional. Speech must become a tool, not a reflex. When you speak rarely, people notice. When you speak selectively, people listen. When you speak with purpose, your words shape outcomes. This contrast, long silence, followed by precise speech, creates an aura around you. People become curious about your perspective. They assume you're thinking deeply. They project intelligence onto you simply because you don't leak your thoughts constantly. In every room, people will wonder, what does this person think? Why aren't they saying anything? What are they planning? What do they know that I don't? Mystique is born from selective communication. 5. Understand Machiavelli's final irony. Masters of silence are invisible. The most skilled practitioners of this discipline don't appear powerful. They appear calm, measured, observant. They don't announce what they're doing. They don't tell people how strategic they are. They don't brag about being mysterious or quiet or cunning. They simply are. We notice the loud, but we respect the quiet, and we fear the unreadable. In a society obsessed with attention, constant posting, live reactions, and public vulnerability, the person who withholds becomes rare, and rarity creates value. This is why Machiavelli argued that silence is not the absence of communication. It is communication. It signals confidence. It signals independence. It signals control. And it gives you influence without effort. Now, let's go deeper into the psychology behind all of this. Silence as a psychological force. Silence doesn't just affect others. It affects you. When you practice this discipline, you become harder to provoke, harder to predict, harder to manipulate, harder to pressure, harder to read. Silence trains your mind to slow down, to detach, to choose, to respond intentionally instead of reacting emotionally. People think talking is strength, but silence is the stronger muscle. If you can hold your tongue when every part of you wants to speak, that's control. If you can listen when you'd rather argue, that's power. If you can observe without revealing, that's strategy. Machiavelli's entire philosophy centers on one idea. Power belongs to the disciplined, and discipline begins with restraint, withholding, watching, choosing, acting only when the moment is right. Strategic silence isn't passive. It's active. It's deliberate. It's the difference between reacting and ruling, between being ordinary and being formidable, between blending in and standing apart. And that leads us to one of Machiavelli's greatest insights. People reveal themselves faster than you ever need to reveal yourself. Your job is to watch, to listen, to gather, to understand, to prepare, and only then to speak. Silence is more than a tactic. It's a lens through which you see human behavior with startling clarity. The moment you begin practicing it intentionally, you start noticing something. People reveal themselves constantly, and most of the time they reveal far more than they realize. Machiavelli understood this intuitively. He believed that human beings are simple in one specific way. We expose our priorities, our fears, and our vulnerabilities through our words and reactions. The moment someone speaks, the moment someone explains themselves, the moment someone rushes to justify, they tell you exactly who they are. That's why silence is so powerful. It turns every interaction into a mirror. When you say nothing, others begin projecting. They fill the void. They imagine your position. They assume your intentions. They reveal their own desperation, motivation, insecurity, or ambition, all without you having to ask a single question. This projection space is one of the hidden psychological weapons of silence. Silence pulls out truth without force. Interrogators have used this for centuries. They'll ask a question and then stay silent, staring, waiting, allowing the discomfort to build. Most people can't handle the tension. They start talking to relieve their own anxiety. They reveal information that wasn't asked for. They crack under the pressure of nothing. Negotiators use the same technique. They make an offer, then remain completely still. No justifications, no explanations, no reasons, no emotional tone. Just silence. And the other side begins bargaining against themselves. They lower their price. They start explaining constraints. They offer concessions. They babble their way into a weaker position, simply because they couldn't handle the quiet. Psychologically, silence is a vacuum, and human beings hate vacuums. We rush to fill them with truth, with insecurity, with details, with over-explanations, with concessions. Silence isn't aggressive. It isn't manipulative. It isn't dishonest. It's simply patient. And patience reveals truth. Silence changes the social hierarchy instantly. People misinterpret loudness as strength. But in reality, the person who speaks the most is often the person seeking approval. Think about it. Who tries the hardest to impress? Who over-explains their decisions? Who rambles during meetings? Who fills every pause with words? It's almost always the person who feels the least secure about their position. Now look at people with real authority. They speak less. They speak slower. They speak more deliberately. They don't explain everything. They don't justify themselves. And because their communication is selective, it lands harder. Their presence feels heavier. Their words feel more important. Their silence feels meaningful. Silence creates hierarchy without needing to assert hierarchy. Machiavelli saw this in politics, but the same thing happens in everyday life. In a room of peers, the quietest person is usually perceived as the most confident. In a negotiation, the silent person appears more powerful than the talkative one. In conflict, the calm listener appears more grounded than the emotional attacker. In friendships, the person who listens more becomes the person who understands more. And that creates influence. People fear being unreadable. People admire those who don't beg for attention. People respect those who aren't driven by impulse. Silence makes you stand out because it's rare, and because it signals something modern culture undervalues: self-control. Silence sharpens your decision-making. Most mistakes in life come from talking too early or acting too quickly. You commit to something before you've gathered all the information. You reveal your plan before understanding the other side's strategy. You share your goals with people who secretly want you to fail. You defend yourself before the accusation is even fully formed. You react emotionally instead of responding strategically. Silence gives you a buffer. It creates a natural pause between stimulus and response, and that pause is where intelligence lives. It's where strategy forms. It's where you stop being reactive and start being intentional. Machiavelli wasn't promoting coldness. He was promoting clarity. He understood that every impulsive word is a liability. Every reactive decision narrows your options. Silence gives you space to think, space to observe, space to plan. It makes your actions smarter. It makes your words sharper. It makes your strategy cleaner. Silence protects your reputation and image. Here's something most people don't realize. The more you talk, the more opportunities you create to undermine yourself. Every long explanation risks sounding insecure. Every emotional rant risks sounding unbalanced. Every impulsive opinion risks sounding uninformed. Every attempt to defend yourself risks legitimizing criticism. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved. But the deeper message was that respect requires distance, and distance requires restraint. When you speak less, you reveal less weakness. You expose fewer insecurities. You give critics less ammunition. You appear more stable and grounded. You maintain a cleaner, more controlled image. People don't judge you by what you keep private. They judge you by what you reveal. If you reveal too much, you become ordinary and predictable. If you reveal selectively, you become compelling. Mystique is not a character trait, it's a choice. Silence creates an aura of competence. People naturally assume, if you're not rushing to talk, you must be confident. If you're not jumping into every debate, you must be above it. If you're not reacting emotionally, you must be thinking strategically. If you're not explaining yourself, you must be secure in your decisions. Silence tricks people into respecting you, not through deception, but through discipline. It's not that you're hiding anything. It's that you're choosing what deserves to be shown. This is why leaders benefit from silence. It's why negotiators use it. It's why judges speak less than lawyers. It's why the calmest people often have the most influence in a group. Silence magnifies your presence. It enhances your authority. It deepens your impact. The irony: silence is more persuasive than speech. Machiavelli understood that persuasion doesn't always come from arguments or explanations. Often, the most persuasive thing you can do is say nothing. Silence forces people to reevaluate their own position. Silence makes them replay their words in their mind. Silence makes them wonder if they revealed too much. Silence makes them question whether you know something they don't. It creates doubt. It creates pressure. It creates movement. And you didn't have to push or argue. You simply withheld. This is persuasion through presence, not performance. Silence creates mental toughness. Finally, silence doesn't just give you power outwardly. It builds power inwardly. Every time you choose silence when you want to speak, you strengthen the part of your mind that controls your impulses. And impulse control is the foundation of discipline. Machiavelli believed that the ruler who cannot control himself cannot control anything else. Silence is the training ground for that control. You become less emotional. You become less reactive. You become more observant. You become more patient. You become more strategic. Silence is meditation in motion. Silence, in Machiavelli's world, isn't shyness, weakness, or passivity. It's a deliberate discipline, a strategic choice to control information, protect your intentions, and force others into revealing themselves. In a culture obsessed with constant expression, the person who masters silence stands out as the one who thinks deeper, moves smarter, and acts with purpose. Today, people overshare everything: goals, emotions, plans, frustrations. They reveal strategies before they even exist. Machiavelli would see this as self-inflicted vulnerability. His philosophy is simple. Power belongs to the person who chooses what to reveal, not the one who reveals everything. Let's examine how silence becomes a decisive advantage in daily life. 1. Silence in conflict. Most people lose arguments because they talk themselves into defeat. They get emotional, defensive, and frantic. They reveal fears they didn't plan to share, weaknesses they didn't know they had, and insecurities the other person can weaponize. But if you stay silent, the other person keeps talking and exposes more than you. They reveal what truly bothers them. They show their hand emotionally. They become more reactive while you remain composed. Silence in conflict is not withdrawal, it's observation. You gather information, you learn their motives, and you keep your dignity intact. And when you finally speak, your words land harder because they arrive after clarity, not impulse. 2. Silence in leadership. Great leaders don't speak constantly. They don't over-explain or react publicly to every criticism. Leaders who talk too much dilute their authority. They appear ungrounded, emotional, and desperate for validation. Strategic silence does the opposite. It signals confidence and certainty. It shows that your decisions are intentional, not impulsive. It creates a sense of authority and stability. It makes people pay attention when you finally speak. Machiavelli understood that distance creates respect. A leader who speaks selectively projects strength, while one who talks endlessly looks uncertain. 3. Silence in ambition. One of the biggest modern mistakes is announcing goals prematurely. People broadcast their dreams, timelines, and plans to anyone who will listen, even to those who secretly hope they fail. Machiavelli would warn against this. Your ambitions should live quietly until they are strong. Silence protects your momentum, shields your plans from sabotage, allows you to pivot without judgment, prevents you from being locked into your earlier words. Ambition doesn't need an audience. It needs discipline. 4. Silence in relationships. Silence, when used correctly, creates emotional maturity. It stops arguments from escalating. It gives space for clarity. It prevents you from reacting from wounded ego or temporary anger. When you stay silent long enough to let emotions settle, you avoid saying things you'll regret. You see people's true intentions. You understand the problem instead of fueling it. You maintain self-respect even in difficult moments. Silence isn't punishment. It's self-control. 5. Silence in strategy. Silence is a strategic shield. When you keep your intentions private, you remain unpredictable. You control the timing of your moves. You let others reveal themselves long before you reveal anything. Strategic silence gives you flexibility to change direction, protection from premature judgment, freedom to act without external pressure. The advantage of being unreadable. A predictable person can be countered. A silent person cannot be mapped. This is why Machiavelli believed that full transparency is often a trap. Transparency binds you to your past statements. It exposes your vulnerabilities. It gives people leverage over you. Silence, on the other hand, keeps every option open. Silence versus transparency. Modern culture glorifies transparency, but Machiavelli would argue that transparency without intention weakens you. When you reveal too much, you become predictable. You become easy to manipulate. You lose control over your narrative. You invite criticism and sabotage. Silence protects you from these pitfalls. It makes people guess. It forces them to fill the gaps with their own assumptions. It creates psychological weight around your presence. You are not hiding. You are choosing. The Machiavellian communicator. A Machiavellian communicator doesn't speak to fill silence. They speak to influence. They are selective observant, intentional patient, calm strategic. They don't over-explain. They don't expose themselves emotionally. They don't narrate their every thought. They don't reveal plans before they're formed. They speak only when words create advantage. That is the core of shut up and win. Silence strengthens you. Silence protects you. Silence forces others to show their cards first. Silence makes your actions unpredictable. Silence makes your words hit harder. And here's the final Machiavellian irony. The world remembers loud people, but it is shaped by quiet ones. The quiet strategist influences without announcing anything. They gather information secretly. They move without broadcasting. They win without theatrics. They rise without noise. By the time anyone notices their power, it's already too late. In a world drowning in noise, silence becomes a superpower. Say less, watch more, reveal selectively, let your results speak. Silence doesn't just help you win. It ensures no one sees you coming until the victory is already yours.